Welcome to They Are Waiting for Us from Forbes Books, the podcast that explores how education can transform lives and communities, featuring conversations with change agents who are making a difference in education, from parents and advocates to teachers and leaders. Here's Dr. Lisa Andrew.
I'm back with Senator John Laird, currently representing the 17th District. We've been discussing how growing up as a child of educators fueled his decades of service to the people of California. Now, Senator, let's turn our attention to some of the most pressing issues in the California education system. Currently, at the Silicon Valley Education Foundation, we are advocating for equal per-pupil funding for all students, regardless of their zip code. We believe that only once each student is given an equal per-pupil amount can you then truly use supplemental and concentration funds as equity funding. What do you see as the major barriers to increasing education funding for state-funded school districts in California?
I think the barrier is that not all school districts are equal. And that's the real barrier, in the sense that if you look at property tax revenue, I've lost count, but I think there's 60 basic aid school districts in the state where the property tax revenue is so high that they just get the basic state aid. And, there's this one in the district in Carmel Valley where I think they get a 43% bump above the other schools nearby because they have such a significant property tax revenue. And so saying equal is really difficult, because within the system, you would have to reach out and take property taxes from the rich districts and reallocate it to the poor districts. And that's what the school aid system tries to do by creating basic aid districts, but there's still inequities there. And then the local control funding formula, which was established 10 years ago, is really designed to give a disproportionate amount to some of the school districts with high percentages of disadvantaged students. And so in the abstract, it makes sense to do equal. And then if you have significant revenue, to do concentration grants and after school and some of the other things, certain support for pre-kindergarten and transitional kindergarten or pre-K and TK, then that makes sense. But there's certain things in the system that don't make that as easy as it sounds. And so it's trying to figure out the best way to balance all these interests.
Yeah, I think the position that we're taking is we don't want to take away from the community-funded districts because of the resources they have. They've been able to develop these really wonderful programs. They've been able to pay their teachers very well. They've been able to create STEM experiences that are preparing their students for Silicon Valley. They've been able to hire mental health professionals. So by no means do you want to dismantle this wonderful experience that students are having in, say, Los Altos, and water down or anything of that sort. But when we've got, I think the proportion throughout the state is you're right. It's like 13, 15%. But here in Santa Clara County, 45% of our districts are basic aid and 45%, and the other percentage are state funded. So the disparity is huge. We know that it's not like that any other place, but here in Santa Clara County. So we've got state funded schools that are getting $11,000 per pupil, and we have community funded schools that are getting $24,000 per pupil. So even with supplemental and concentration coming into those state-funded schools, I mean, it's just, we're just not able to do it.
Let me add one thing, which is that there's this analogy over in the community college system, and they did student-centered funding formula to try to do disproportionate grants to where there are disadvantaged students. And what it does is it's going to take a lot of the more wealthy college districts that are primarily in the Bay Area and along the coast. And if this is fully implemented, they will be cut. And for the district where I once served on the college board in Cabrillo, it has this anomalous situation we went to the voters when I was chair of the board 25 years ago, and we established a center in Watsonville, which is a disadvantaged community. And if they're forced to cut their budget by 10%, that's probably what will be cut because you'll defer to the core campus. So it doesn't seem right. I'm fine with letting the winners win. And there's interestingly, for your K through 12 listeners, there's an analogous situation for a switch or average daily attendance to enrollment. And that's been proposed as the funding mechanism. And everybody thinks, oh, it's much more logical to do it on enrollment. Let's do that. Proposition 98 is a fixed pie. And so if you switch, you create winners and losers. And it would take $5 billion additional dollars to be able to keep the losers from losing. And the perfect example is I had a run done on all the school districts in my district. And I can't believe my home district is the example. So Santa Cruz City has a elementary district, K through 8, that's basic aid, and a high school district that's broader into the region. And if you went to enrollment and didn't augment school funding, the high school district would get 15% more, and the elementary district would lose 15%. The proposal is switch to enrollment, add $5 billion, and then they would just be held, and then everybody would gain. And I'm the education budget chair. If we had $5 billion we could spend, I'd want to give it to everybody and bump everybody up by a like percent. And I think sometimes when people advocate for a switch to an enrollment system, they don't understand what it practically really means.
Yeah, it is trying to shift from this scarcity mindset. And I run my own checkbook, so I understand what comes in can come out. I think that when we look at we're the fourth largest, economy or something, and breaks that others are getting and things. I believe with every part of me that there is an answer where we can bring in more money into the education system for those who need it, because we're not providing a high quality education for all of our students in the state of California.
Well, the one thing to note is that since 2017, we have had a 40% increase in K through 14 education. And where California was in the bottom 10% of per capita pupil spending, we're moving up toward the middle of the states now. Yes, there's problems because it comes at as the same time as inflation. The California economy is, as you said, so strong that it makes it hard for teachers to buy housing or live, and trying to pay enough is always a challenge. And so I'm just happy that we have really moved up from where we were, but there are still these challenges it's interesting because if you look at my district, it's schizophrenic in the sense that I have these rural small areas like Parkfield and Bradley and San Miguel and Shandon, where they're struggling with the schools in a rural environment. I mean, on the Big Sur coastline is one of the smallest K through 12 districts in the state. It has 17 students. And so you're sitting there with the rural ones, and then you have these coastal places where there's basic aid and other things, Santa Cruz, Pacific Grove, Carmel, San Luis Coastal and San Luis Obispo County, some places for now up in Santa Clara. I say for now because my district's going to change a little after December. But the thing is that the coastal ones are looking for ways to do housing. There's the program Landed that is trying to do housing for teachers. The voters in Santa Cruz authorized 78 units of workforce housing for the school district, and they have the land to do it. Monterey is considering the same thing. Going to the voters and including units of housing. And so there's these challenges in the high cost of living areas with making sure that you have people that can do it. And one of the byproducts of the pandemic is there are a lot of people that were hanging by a thread, and the pandemic just sort of remove them from the picture. I mean, there's this really fine restaurant in Pismo Beach, and when I was doing a Zoom with the Pismo Beach Chamber of Commerce, they said that when they reopened, they did not have a service employee when they reopened that was there when they closed. And I think and you look at places and they just struggle to keep anybody that's on the surf. I mean, recruiting school bus drivers is a challenge for many districts.
Right. They're just leaving the field. I mean, it's more, yes, it's money and it's being able, one of the biggest, again, where you live and how you live. We have in East San Jose, a teacher will come in and work there for 1 or 2 years and then move over into, a higher paying school district. Can't blame them. I mean, go where you can make the money, go where it is, but then it just perpetuates this situation in these districts where they're not just short-staffed, they're no-staffed. It sets up this, again, the winners and losers, and it's, I just believe that we've got it in the state budget. If we look at the cost-benefit analysis, we can either spend it on homelessness, incarcerated youth, mentally ill folks, or we can spend it at the beginning when we can get folks educated and get them on a path of economic mobility.
I think the current situation of the state budget is a nightmare. As we are recording this, the legislative analysts raised the deficit number by $15 billion, and it's now nearing 30% of the general fund budget, and nobody's going to escape. And so our challenge is, because the state in many ways is the education and social safety net. And so how are we going to triage through this to make sure that people don't use valuable support that they have or they need? And the governor has this proposal in his January budget for Proposition 98, which funds kindergarten through 14 community colleges and well, and it's a nightmare because the revenues plunged in a way that schools in the current budget got $8 billion more than they were entitled to. And normally, you would have the schools have a deficit factor, and over the coming years, it would even out and the schools would pay it back. Well, given the fact that with this revenue plunge, there'd be lucky to be an increase at all year over year into next year. I mean, his projection is between 0 and 1% of an increase. And actually, it's the property taxes we talked about that are carrying that. If it was on the state budget, it would be a decrease. And then the governor's proposal is to pay the $8 billion back starting 3 years from now, and to pay it back from the general fund, not through education. So a lot of the education administrators say, we love this proposal. But what it'll do is the very things you mentioned. Extra programs would have to be part of this. Children's health would have to contribute. Children's nutrition would have to contribute. You'd get it in other places in the general fund. You'd have to make cuts higher to pay back the education part. So I basically am not a fan of this loan. It's $8 billion and the problem's $73 billion. We're going to be struggling. And people come in the last couple of weeks. I've had child care advocates, CSU, UC, hospitals, community clinics. People have been coming through the Capitol on their lobbying days. And I have told them that this is a mess, that nobody's going to get out of this without taking some kind of a haircut, and that it's not enough to say, oh, don't just cut us. We want all these increases. And privately, you're going to have to decide what's the most important to you. And don't negotiate against yourself. Don't go tell us that before you have to. But people need to be ready, because this is going to happen really quickly in May and June. And we're going to have to make some horrible decisions. And I want our stakeholders to be involved, and I want them to be thinking about this in a good way. And if the only way they think about it is to say, don't cut us, and I'm done thinking about it, that's not going to be helpful.
I agree. I met with you a few months ago, and you had asked me this and had said, well, what are your ideas? You're coming to me, bringing this up, but what are your ideas, Lisa? And I know that myself and some of my colleagues are more than willing to come to the table and talk with you and think with you. However, we may know the education sandbox really, really well. We aren't necessarily versed in, the whole entire California budget very, very well. So I think both of us coming in and bringing the expertise that we have and the on the ground that we have is really great.
Well, you see, there's certain things about I know some people just freak out at the thought of budgets. They're intimidated, and yet it's where the key decisions are made. It's really what underlines things. And, we have firefighting. We might have to go from 4 firefighters on a crew to 3 in some places. And there's certain places that draw down revenue. And I think it's called the impact program, but it's for reproductive health services. And for every dollar the state puts in, it draws down $9 from the federal government. And so if you said, oh, we're cutting everything equally, everybody's going to take a 5% haircut. If you put it in that impact program, the real cut will be 30% or 40%. So you want to make sure that you protect drawing down the outside revenue and not be arbitrary in what the number is across the board. That makes it a very artful process. And it has to be explained the way I'm explaining it now. So why aren't they taking a cut that's 1% or 2% higher? Because actually they will be, even if they get the same, because of what they're losing in the revenue that's coming in. And we have to take all that into account.
Absolutely. So another huge access issue for many students in California is the access to technology at school and at home. The Silicon Valley Education Foundation works alongside the California Emerging Technology Fund in implementing the School to Home initiative aimed at eliminating the digital divide. So what steps need to be taken to ensure all students have equal access to technology?
Well, let's just say off the top, we have to take the steps. Even if we can't clearly define them,
yes.
we have to do it.
Yes.
And it's across a number of different places, because some of it is that kids don't even have the access to personal computers. There's that. And then there's the fact that the broadband or the digital connection really differs into disadvantaged and rural areas. And then there's the whole issue of making sure kids are equipped to use it all when they get there. And so that sort of has all these differing demands. I mean, the state, when we were flush, put billions of dollars into expanding broadband. There is different kind of training. It's interesting because when I was in the assembly, and I've not been in the assembly in 15 years, I remember going and visiting Sobrato High in Morgan Hill, and it was a relatively new campus. And somehow they had some arrangement with Apple Computer that there was a computer donated for like every kid in some of these classes or things. I was just incredibly impressed. And yet I don't see that in other schools. And I imagine as somebody that's an Apple user, that probably lasted them 3 or 4 years before they had to afford the next generation. And so those are big challenges on every level. As you can tell my description, it's not easy. It is not easy to figure it out, but at the state level, we have some global things. The global thing is we're going to have a tough time this year, but for the last 7 years, it's keep the revenue going up to school districts, let them try to figure it out. We can do the big assist with broadband in disadvantaged areas, and it's trying to do the mix of all those things that get you there.
Yeah. Just know that at the end, I'll be asking you what kind of education bills you're promoting and supporting. But before we go there, you had brought this up. Let's talk about celebrating the wonderful diversity of our state. And there's so much opportunity to be modeled of inclusion for the rest of the world here in California because of our wonderful diversity. So how well do you believe our curriculum and teaching approaches promote diversity of thought and inclusion of all?
If you look at one of the most draconian bills with regard to transgender kids. It's like the teachers would be the persons that are supposed to report to parents and out their kids and do stuff. And and the ability to have a thoughtful, rational conversation in some areas seems to be passing. And so it's something that we have to do. And there was this, back in the nostalgic old days when we were just fighting about gay kids, there was a study done by somebody at San Francisco State that, to me, it was really obvious. I thought, why do you need a study for this?
Exactly.
But they were studying young kids that were gay and what happened to them, and if the parents could deal with it. And there were a number of parents that couldn't deal with it, and in some cases kicked their kids out of the house. And when that happened, they had to live on the street. They had to do really challenging things to survive. And so it wasn't rocket science to figure out that kids were more at risk for any of a number of things if that happened. But this study circled back to the parents and really said, do you understand that your kid is really at risk? And in a way that, oh my God, a lot of the parents said, and that they had to figure something out, and they had to work with this themselves. And it really, really helped doing that. And so the question is what can we do to have those kind of rational conversations, not like at a school board meeting with 400 people where there's a recall threatened or something like that. It's like, how do you figure out how to do this? And that is the whole thing. I imagine that, it took, I came of age in a much different time. And so, I sort of came to terms with being gay when I was in college, and it took me about 5 or 6 years to have the conversation with my parents, which was agonizing, and yet they were supportive. The whole notion of forced outing, where some teacher would have to go report to my parents that they thought I was gay, is enough I can see why there would be high mental health, high suicide risk, all these things. It would be horrible. It's hard to understand why there isn't a common understanding of that. And so the real question is how do you have those conversations in a way that you try to advance this and you try to keep the mental health and safety of the kids at the front of the conversation? So that is totally a challenge.
Well, I want to give you a moment. Are there any bills that you are sponsoring or that you're in support of that you'd like to give a plug to?
I think this year, it's one of those things that if we have any bills that cost money, they're not going to move. When I left the assembly, as you said in the introduction, on the assembly side, I had 82 bills that were signed into law in my 6 years, and my staff gave me a bound volume of them when I left the assembly. And so I was flipping through it, sort of trying to remember what I did legislatively when we had no money. How was I successful in doing something when we had no money? And so to me, it's not so much the bills as this year, it's the budget. That is the ball game. That is where people will have to engage, even though there'll be some bills about certain things, and I don't know how any of them. If you really want to do something, money has to come. And so I'm just not sure how we're going to do that, because in the past few years, I really expanded the community college access to foster kids. Did a whole host of things, but they all cost a little money. So I don't know. The budget is the whole ballgame this year.
Yeah. Okay. So, Senator Laird, if folks wanted to get in touch with you or to find out more about you and your leadership and your priorities, what should they do?
They should go to my webpage, Senate District 17. But if you just do Senator John Laird and Google, it will get you there. And we have just different things about bills that are being introduced, about what the record is. We have ways that you can get in touch if you have a question, because the information isn't on the website. I just got an email from somebody in the last week saying, I want to know about the cement ship in Aptos and this. And I said, I have over 500,000 constituents. And if I took the time to respond to everyone individually, I would never sleep and I wouldn't reach everybody. But I had time to do that.
But maybe it doesn't cost money, and that could be a win.
Yeah, exactly. But, the website is SD for Senate District, SD17.ca. sd17.ca.gov, sd17.senate.ca.gov. And there'll be contact information I have offices all over, and the Sacramento one. And if you have a question that isn't answered by somewhere on the webpage, you can get in touch and we'll work on it.
Great. Well, thank you so very much for your public service and your dedication to education and for just being you and to being honest. And I just love we just need to take a step. We just need to do something. We just need to take a step. We just need to do something. That's one of the things that I really admire about you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, and thank you for taking time. I know it's busy to chat with me today, and I wish you all the best and hope you to be wildly successful this year with managing the budget.
Thank you. I really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you all soon.
And that wraps up this episode of They Are Waiting for Us. If you've enjoyed the show, please take a moment to subscribe so you can get notifications when new episodes drop. Also, if you can spare a minute, I would greatly appreciate it if you could leave a review to help others like yourself discover the show. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.
This has been They Are Waiting for Us. If you want to learn how to create economic opportunity through equal access to quality education and create an extraordinary learning environment focused on everyone realizing their full potential, go to drlisaandrew.com. They Are Waiting for Us is a production of Forbes Books.